At my husband's funeral, his mother walked up to me and whispered, "It should have been you." I was too stunned to speak, until the lawyer handed me a letter that completely destroyed her plan. At my husband's funeral, his mother walked up to me, leaned in close, and whispered, "It should have been you." I couldn't breathe. The words hit me like a slap across the face. My body went cold, my heart stopped, and I just stood there, frozen. She didn't wait for a response. She pulled back, smoothed out her dress, and turned to greet the next guest, her face twisted into a mask of fake grief. I felt dizzy, my vision blurring as I tried to process what she'd just said. I thought I'd misheard her, but the look on her face told me I hadn't. Those words were meant for me, sharp and cold. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stay calm. I couldn't make a scene. Not here. Not now. Not at Samuel's funeral. Samuel and I were married for 6 years. We were happy. Sure, we had our ups and downs like any couple, but we loved each other. We were planning to start a family. We'd just bought our dream house, a beautiful old Victorian with a wraparound porch and a big backyard. Samuel was so proud of that house. I can still see the way his eyes lit up when we first walked through it, the way he hugged me and said, "This is it. This is where we're going to build our future." But then the accident happened. One rainy night, a truck ran a red light. It was quick, they told me. He didn't suffer. I didn't care. He was gone, just like that. His mother never liked me. From the moment Samuel brought me home to meet her, I could feel the judgment radiating off her. She was cold, polite in that way that's more insulting than outright rudeness. Everything about me was wrong in her eyes, my job, my background, even my cooking. I wasn't good enough for her son, and she made sure I knew it. I did my best to get along with her for Samuel's sake. I smiled through the passive-aggressive comments, the helpful suggestions on how to be a better wife. I let it go when she accidentally called Samuel's ex by my name more than once. I told myself it didn't matter. Samuel loved me, and that was enough. But standing there at his funeral, her words echoing in my mind, I realized just how much she hated me. "It should have been you." Those words clung to me like smoke, choking me. I moved through the rest of the service on autopilot, shaking hands, nodding, hugging people I barely knew. My whole body felt numb. I barely heard the prayers, the eulogies, the sobs around me. I felt like I was floating outside my own body, watching myself go through the motions. After the burial, we gathered at his mother's house. It was huge, the kind of place that looked like it belonged in a magazine, every room perfect and untouched, like no one really lived there. Samuel grew up in that house, but he never talked about it much. Now, standing in the grand living room surrounded by people dressed in black, I felt out of place, like an intruder. His mother played the perfect hostess, gliding from guest to guest, dabbing her dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. She looked heartbroken, devastated. But when her gaze flicked to me, the mask slipped for just a second, and I saw the anger, the resentment. I felt my stomach twist. I tried to keep my distance, sticking to the edges of the room, quietly thanking people for coming. A few friends approached me, giving their condolences, hugging me tightly. I smiled, nodded, said the right things. But all I could think about was her words. "It should have been you." I couldn't take it anymore. I slipped out early, mumbling something about needing to rest. I felt her eyes on my back as I walked out, burning into me, filled with hatred. A week later, I was called to the lawyer's office for the reading of Samuel's will. I didn't even know he'd made one. We were young. We thought we had all the time in the world. I arrived to find his mother already there, sitting rigidly in a chair, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She didn't look at me when I walked in. I sat as far from her as I could, my hands trembling. The lawyer introduced himself, then started reading. Legal words I didn't understand, things about estates and assets. I tried to focus, but my mind kept wandering back to that day, to her voice, to those words. Then, his voice cut through my fog. "To my beloved wife, I leave all my personal belongings, our home, and the entirety of my savings." I felt the air leave the room. His mother let out a choked sound, like she'd been punched in the gut. Her face went pale, her hands clutching her purse so tightly I thought she might tear it. The lawyer kept reading. "To my mother, I leave the family heirlooms from her father. I know she cherishes them, and I want her to have them." Her eyes widened, her mouth opening and closing like she wanted to scream but couldn't find the words. She turned to me then, her face twisted with fury, and for a second, I thought she was going to lunge at me. The lawyer cleared his throat, pulling out an envelope. "There's one more thing," he said, handing it to me. "Samuel wanted you to read this in private." His handwriting was on the front, my name written in his familiar messy scrawl. I held it in my shaking hands, my heart pounding. I could feel her eyes on me, burning with hate, but I didn't look at her. I turned and walked out of the room, her sharp voice following me down the hallway. What did he say? What did he leave you? I ignored her. I didn't look back. I drove home in a daze, clutching the letter so tightly my fingers ached. I walked into the house, into the kitchen where Samuel used to make breakfast every Sunday morning, and sat at the table. I stared at the envelope, my heart racing, before tearing it open. His words hit me like a tidal wave, raw and honest. He wrote about his love for me, how he wished he'd told me more often. How he was scared of leaving me behind, but he knew I was strong enough to keep going. My chest tightened, tears burning my eyes. Then the letter took a turn. He wrote about his mother, things I never knew. How she tried to break us up, telling him I was only after his money, planting doubts in his mind. How she pressured him to get a prenup, to protect his assets. How she even threatened to cut him off if he stayed with me. The last line made my blood run cold, she'll try to take everything from you. I made sure she can't. Don't let her hurt you anymore. I felt sick. All those years, all those passive-aggressive comments, the coldness, the way she looked at me like I was dirt under her shoe. She never saw me as Samuel's wife. She saw me as the woman who took her son away. And now, she wanted to take everything he left behind. I wasn't going to let that happen. I sat there, staring at Samuel's letter, my hands shaking. I read it again, then again, the words blurring through my tears. She'll try to take everything from you. I made sure she can't. Don't let her hurt you anymore. It all made sense now, her coldness, the way she always looked down on me, her whispered words at the funeral. It should have been you. She was furious that Samuel chose me, that he loved me enough to leave everything to me. She thought she'd get it all, that his death would bring her son back to her, in a way. But Samuel had outsmarted her. He knew her better than I did. I wiped my tears, anger bubbling up in my chest. She thought she could scare me, push me out of his life even after he was gone. Well, she was wrong. I wasn't going to let her win. Not this time. The next morning, I woke to the sound of banging on my front door. It was so loud it shook the walls. My heart jumped, and I rushed downstairs, peering through the window. I wasn't surprised to see her standing there, her face twisted with fury, her hands clenched at her sides. I took a deep breath, steeling myself before opening the door. She stormed in before I could say a word, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. How dare you, she hissed, her voice low and dangerous. You manipulated him. You turned him against his own mother. I crossed my arms, trying to stay calm. I didn't do anything. Samuel made his own choices. She let out a bitter laugh, her eyes flashing with anger. He would never have left me with nothing. Not unless you tricked him. You poisoned him against me. Her words stung, but I stood my ground. I didn't have to. He saw who you really were. Her face turned red, her body shaking with rage. For a second, I thought she was going to slap me. But then she took a deep breath, her expression shifting, her eyes narrowing. You think you've won? She said quietly, her voice dripping with malice. This isn't over. I'll get what's mine. One way or another. She turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I sank to the floor, my heart pounding. I knew she meant every word. She wasn't going to let this go. 2 days later, I got a letter from her lawyer. She was contesting the will. The letter claimed I'd unduly influenced Samuel, that I'd manipulated him into leaving everything to me. It was full of lies, but I wasn't surprised. She would do anything to get what she wanted. I hired my own lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Marissa who'd dealt with her share of bitter inheritance fights. Don't worry, Marissa told me, flipping through the papers. This is just scare tactics. The will is airtight. Samuel made sure of it. But his mother didn't back down. She dragged me to court, painting me as a gold digger, a manipulator who preyed on her poor, innocent son. She cried on the stand, putting on a performance worthy of an award. She said I was cold, distant, that I kept Samuel away from his family. She even claimed I'd fought with him the night before he died, planting the idea that I was somehow to blame for his accident. I sat there, numb, listening to her lies, watching the fake tears roll down her cheeks. I wanted to scream, to stand up and tell the world who she really was, but my lawyer squeezed my arm, a silent warning to stay calm. Then she did something I didn't see coming. She brought up Samuel's ex. She called her to the stand, parading her as the perfect woman who was supposed to marry her son. Samuel's ex played along, batting her eyes, saying how much she still cared for him, how she'd always been close to his mother. It felt like a slap in the face. I knew his mother never liked me, but to pull his ex into this? It was a new low. I watched them exchange glances, both of them smiling just enough to make my blood boil. It didn't work. The judge saw through her lies, and the will was upheld. But the fight wasn't over. She appealed, dragging it out even longer, draining me financially and emotionally. She was trying to break me, to wear me down until I gave up. I started getting harassing phone calls in the middle of the night. At first, it was just heavy breathing, then it turned into whispers. "You don't deserve him," a voice would hiss, before hanging up. Sometimes, they just laughed, low and cruel. I changed my number twice, but it didn't stop. I knew it was her. I could feel her hatred, even through the phone. But I couldn't prove it. Then the letters started. Nasty, hateful letters calling me every name in the book. They showed up in my mailbox, no return address, written in cut-out letters like some creepy ransom note. One of them just said, "It should have been you." I stopped sleeping. I jumped at every noise. I started looking over my shoulder, feeling like I was being watched. I was scared, but I refused to run. She wanted to scare me out of my own life, to make me so miserable I'd give in. I wasn't going to let her. Then, one night, I came home to find my front door unlocked. I knew I'd locked it that morning. My stomach dropped, my heart racing as I pushed the door open. The house was dark and quiet, nothing seemed out of place, but I felt a chill run down my spine. I walked through the rooms, turning on lights, checking every corner. When I reached the bedroom, I stopped cold. There, on my pillow, was a single black rose. My hands trembled as I picked it up, the petals cold and velvety. There was no note, no sign of a break-in, nothing to prove she'd been there. But I knew. This was her warning. I called the police, but they couldn't do anything. No forced entry, no proof of who it was. They suggested I get security cameras, maybe a restraining order, but they didn't take me seriously. I installed cameras the next day, every angle covered. But the damage was done. I was terrified, jumping at shadows, locking every door twice. She was trying to drive me mad, and I was scared it was working. I found myself talking to Samuel at night, clutching his letter, asking him how to fight her. How to stop this nightmare. I could almost hear his voice, his warm laugh, telling me to be strong. But she was relentless, finding new ways to come after me, to try to destroy me. And I was running out of strength. I had no idea how far she was willing to go. Or what she was planning next. The day after finding the black rose, I checked the security cameras first thing in the morning. I was tired, running on maybe 3 hours of sleep, nerves shot from every creak and groan the house made overnight. I felt foolish, paranoid, but I needed to know. I clicked through the footage, my eyes scanning each angle. Living room, nothing. Front porch, quiet. Backyard, empty. Then, at 2:47 a.m., I saw movement. My breath caught in my throat. A figure, dressed in black, face covered by a hood, moving through the shadows along the side of the house. They moved quickly, confidently, like they knew exactly where the cameras were. They stopped at the back door, reached into their pocket, and pulled out a key. A key. I felt cold all over, my blood turning to ice. I watched, frozen, as they unlocked the door and slipped inside, barely making a sound. I fast-forwarded the footage, following them through the house. They moved quietly, never looking up at the cameras, heading straight to my bedroom. I saw them stand by my bed, looking down at me as I slept. I felt sick, my stomach churning. They stood there for a full minute before reaching into their coat and pulling out the black rose, placing it on my pillow. Then they left, locking the door behind them. I replayed the footage, my hands shaking. They had a key. How? Only 2 people had keys to this house, me and Samuel. I changed the locks after he died, so how did they get one? I felt dizzy, my mind racing. There was only one explanation. His mother. She must have copied his key. She still had access to his things, still had that hold on him even after he was gone. She'd been inside my house, standing over me while I slept. I called the police again, showing them the footage. They took it more seriously this time, but they said it still wasn't enough proof to accuse her. They suggested changing the locks again, getting an alarm system. It felt useless. She was always one step ahead. I called Marissa, my lawyer, telling her everything. She was furious, promising to push harder on the restraining order, to expose his mother for who she really was. I felt a flicker of hope, but it didn't last long. The next day, I went to the courthouse to file for the restraining order. When I walked out, she was waiting for me. Standing by her car, arms crossed, a smug smile on her lips. "You look tired," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Not sleeping well?" I felt my blood run cold. She knew. She was taunting me. "Stay away from me," I snapped, trying to sound stronger than I felt. She laughed, a cold, bitter sound. "This isn't your life," she said, taking a step closer. "It was never meant for you. You took everything from me. My son, my family, my legacy. You don't deserve any of it." I stood my ground. "Samuel chose me. He chose to leave everything to me. Because he knew who you really are." Her eyes darkened, her jaw clenching. "You're just a phase," she hissed. "A mistake he made. But I'll fix it. I'll make sure you get nothing." I wanted to scream, to tell her to go to hell, but I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. I walked away, my heart pounding, her laughter echoing behind me. That night, the house was too quiet. Every creak, every whisper of wind made my skin crawl. I double-checked all the locks, set up an alarm, kept my phone beside me. I barely slept, my mind replaying the footage, imagining her standing over me, watching me sleep. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of smoke. At first, I thought I was dreaming. Then I heard the crackling, the faint roar of flames. I shot out of bed, coughing as smoke filled my lungs. Fire. The house was on fire. I grabbed my phone, dialing 911 as I stumbled through the smoke, my eyes burning. The fire was everywhere, crawling up the walls, eating through the floor. I barely made it outside before the roof caved in, flames shooting into the sky. I watched in horror as everything Samuel and I built together went up in smoke. Our memories, our plans, our dreams, all of it turned to ash. I stood there barefoot on the cold, wet grass, my body shaking, tears streaming down my face. The firefighters arrived, but it was too late. The house was gone. Everything was gone. I didn't want to believe she did it. But when the fire chief pulled me aside, his face grim, I knew. "We found traces of gasoline," he said. "This was no accident." I felt my knees go weak. She'd done it. She burned my house down. She was trying to erase me, to erase every trace of Samuel's life with me. I went to stay with a friend, too scared to be alone. The police opened an investigation, but I knew she'd covered her tracks. She was too smart, too careful. A week later, I went to check the mail at the burned-out house. Most of it was junk, but one envelope caught my eye. No return address, just my name written in familiar handwriting. Samuel's handwriting. My hand shook as I opened it, pulling out a single sheet of paper. My heart stopped as I read the words, "I know what she's planning. She told me everything. If you're reading this, it means she went through with it. I'm so sorry. I never wanted to leave you like this. I love you. Please don't let her win. She'll try to destroy everything, but she can't take what we had. She can't take your memories. Stay strong. I believe in you." My vision blurred as I sank to the ground, clutching the letter to my chest. He knew. Even before he died, he knew she was capable of this. He tried to warn me, even from the grave. I felt a surge of anger, hot and powerful, burning through my grief. She tried to destroy my life, to take away everything Samuel left me. But she couldn't take his love. She couldn't take my memories. I wasn't going to let her win. Not now. Not ever. I looked back at the ruins of my home, the ashes still smoldering, the blackened skeleton of the house standing against the sky. She wanted me to give up, to disappear, to let her rewrite history. But she underestimated me. She thought I was weak, that she could bully me into submission. She was wrong. I folded Samuel's letter, tucking it safely in my pocket. I would fight. For him. For us. For everything she tried to steal. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I stood among the ruins of my life, ashes swirling around me, Samuel's letter clenched in my fist. She tried to destroy me, to take everything he left me. But she couldn't take my memories, my love for him, or my will to fight back. This wasn't over. I called Marissa and told her everything. The break-in, the black rose, the fire. I could hear the shock in her voice, then the anger. "We're going to bury her," she promised, her tone cold and fierce. Legally, of course. The next week was a blur of meetings, paperwork, and police interviews. They were finally taking the threat seriously, opening a formal investigation. But I knew she was careful. She wouldn't leave evidence. I needed something stronger, something to expose her for who she really was. Then I remembered the letters. The hateful notes she sent me, the phone calls. They were anonymous, but they had her venom, her voice. Marissa took them, saying she'd have them analyzed, see if they could be traced. It felt like a long shot, but it was better than nothing. Meanwhile, the court battle dragged on. She refused to back down, still contesting the will, still painting me as a gold digger who manipulated her son. Every time we went to court, she glared at me, her eyes burning with hatred. I kept my head high, but inside, I was shaking. Then she made a mistake. She showed up at Samuel's grave. I was there, laying fresh flowers, talking to him like I always did, when I heard her voice behind me. "You don't belong here." I turned to see her standing there, her face twisted with anger. "He was my son," she spat, her voice low and cold. "You were just a passing phase. A distraction. He would have left you eventually." My blood ran cold, but I forced myself to stay calm. "He loved me," I said, my voice steady. "He chose me. That's why he left everything to me. Because he trusted me, not you." She took a step closer, her fists clenched. "He was mine," she hissed. "I gave him life. I raised him. You took him from me, turned him against me." My heart pounded. "I never turned him against you. You did that yourself, with your hatred, your manipulation. He saw through you. That's why he didn't leave you anything. He wanted me to be safe from you." Her face went pale, her eyes wide with shock, then rage. "You ungrateful little," she stopped herself, taking a deep breath, her face hardening. "You don't deserve a penny. Not his money, not his house, nothing. It should have been you in that car." There it was. The truth, laid bare. She didn't just hate me. She wished me dead. I took a step back, shaking my head. "You never loved him," I said softly. "Not really. You just wanted to control him. And when he chose me, you couldn't stand it." Her eyes flashed, her face twisting with fury. "You think you've won? You think you're safe? This isn't over. I'll make sure you lose everything." I watched her storm off, her shoulders rigid, her hands shaking. She was losing control, unraveling. And I was going to use it against her. 2 days later, Marissa called me, excitement in her voice. "We got her," she said. "The letters, they were printed from her work computer. We traced the IP address. It's solid evidence." My knees went weak, relief washing over me. We had proof. Proof that she'd been harassing me, trying to drive me out, maybe even trying to push me to do something drastic. But it wasn't enough. I wanted her to admit everything. I needed her to confess. I went to her house, the grand estate that always felt cold and empty. I knew she was home, her car was in the driveway. I stood on her doorstep, my heart racing, and knocked. She opened the door, her face hardening when she saw me. "What do you want?" she snapped. I met her glare, refusing to back down. "I know you started the fire. I know you've been sending me letters, stalking me. It's over. We have proof." Her face went pale, her eyes widening before she masked her fear with anger. "You're lying." I stepped closer, my voice low. "The police are coming for you. They know everything. But I wanted to hear you say it. Why? Why did you hate me so much? Why did you want me dead?" She laughed, a cold, bitter sound. "You took him from me. He was all I had, and you took him away. He was supposed to come home, to take over the family business, to marry someone who deserved him. Not you." Tears stung my eyes, but I wouldn't let her see me break. "He loved me. We were building a life together, and you couldn't stand it. You couldn't stand that he was happy without you." Her face twisted with rage. "He was never happy. You were holding him back. He would have left you, eventually. I just helped speed things up." My blood ran cold. "What are you talking about?" She smiled then, a cruel, victorious smile. "I told him the truth. That you were using him, that you were cheating on him. He was devastated. He got in the car that night because of me. He died because of me." The world tilted. My vision blurred. You lied to him? You made him think I was unfaithful?" She shrugged, her expression cold. "It should have been you. But this is better. Now you have nothing. You lost him, and soon you'll lose everything he left behind. My knees went weak, anger and grief crashing over me. I wanted to scream, to hit her, to make her feel even a fraction of my pain. But I heard the sirens then, growing louder, flashing red and blue. She heard them too, her face going pale. What did you do? I stepped back, my heart pounding. You just confessed to everything. And the police heard every word. I pulled my phone from my pocket, showing her the recording. It's over. She screamed as they took her away, kicking and fighting, spewing hateful words that barely made sense. I watched her go, feeling nothing but cold, empty relief. In the days that followed, the truth came out. Her lies, her manipulation, her plan to ruin me. I found out she'd even forged documents, trying to steal Samuel's estate. But it was over. She was facing charges for harassment, arson, and fraud. She was finished. Standing at Samuel's grave, I finally felt at peace. She couldn't hurt me anymore. She couldn't take his memory from me. I did it, I whispered, placing fresh flowers on his headstone. I stood up to her. I fought back. For you. For us. The wind rustled through the trees, a soft whisper, almost like his voice. I closed my eyes, letting the tears fall, finally letting go. It should have been you. No. It should have been him. It should have been us, living our life, building our dreams. But she took that from me. And she would pay for it. I walked away, leaving the past behind. It was time to start over. Time to live the life Samuel wanted for me. Without fear. Without her shadow. Finally free.